Welcome back to more of the Fruit of Grisaia. Here we are on Michiru's route. In the last episode, Michiru had an unsuccessful suicide attempt where she tried to take a bunch of benzodiazepine-filled candy, those ramen candies that she's always eating. And fortunately, benzodiazepines are not very likely by themselves to cause overdose. So she was okay. But you know, it was a cry for help. That's what it was. She basically gave up on life, and it was pretty bad. But we did go all the way. You know, we slept together, and that's definitely going to change some things. But now she is ready to tell us her story, and I figured it was probably going to be pretty lengthy, so it's probably best to just cut the episode when I did and start it from here. So let's hear what she's got to say. Well, there's another me inside me. I'm not playing with words or anything. It really is a completely different person. My body doesn't belong to me alone. That really scares me. But it's thanks to her that I'm even alive today. She knows everything about me, but I know nothing of her. In that case, which of us has the better claim to be the real me? I was born into a relatively wealthy family. My parents valued me highly, all the more so because I was their only child. They provided me with an excellent education, hoping to raise me into a worthy daughter, one they could show off with pride. Although I was still a child, no, maybe it's because I was still a child, they brought countless tutors to our home to pack knowledge into my head, like travelers stuffing all their luggage into one tiny, overburdened suitcase. The tutors were all excellent in their fields, and they all charged heavily for their lessons. After studying with them, even the most uncooperative and dim-witted of children could be safely sent off into the world. But I guess I was sort of a special case. It took a lot of time and trouble for me to learn the simplest things. When shown a perfectly clear example, then told, "Now you try, please," I couldn't even imitate my tutors properly. I understood what I needed to do, but when I tried to put that knowledge into practice, my voice would quake and my throat would go dry. Even though I wasn't being threatened in any way, tears would come to my eyes. Piano and violin, arithmetic and the English alphabet, it was all the same, no matter what the subject. When I hesitated, my tutors would say, "You didn't understand? I'll do it one more time," and repeat the example faster than before. Then they would glare at me with eyes that said, "Get it right already." That really scared me. My body would freeze up entirely, my clothes would grow damp with sweat. By the time my molars began to shatter against each other, I could no longer muster the strength to even try. The tutor would scowl at me, looking ready to burst into angry shouting at any moment. The heavier their gazes weighed on me, the less I could move or think. Time crawled past in empty silence. In the end, the tutor would simply sigh in exasperation and leave the room. And it wasn't uncommon for my lessons to end with nothing more than that. Dejected and humiliated, I could only reflect on my own uselessness, and as I stood in my quiet room, stock still and alone, eventually I would hear an angry voice from outside. Again and again, violent words rattled against my window pane like fat drops of icy rain. I would cover my ears and wait for the storm to pass. It tended to go on for quite some time. When the shouting finally ended and silence returned, my father would come to my room and push open the door.
Michiru, どうした? 先生に遠慮することはないんだぞ。お前はパパとママの子だ。やればできるんだからね。あの無能どもにはお前のいいところをちゃんと伸ばせるようにとしっかり言ってやったからな。今度からは頑張るんだぞ。
頑張る。
よし、できるな。そうだ、欲しいものはあるか？何でも買ってやるぞ。
My dad was nice to me. It was hard to believe he was the same person who'd been shouting at the teacher just a few moments ago. When he held me against his broad, powerful chest, I smelled cigarettes and women's perfume. Never the same brand twice. It was comfortable, but also a little scary. I've got to do better next time. I can't let Daddy and Mommy down. That night I knelt by the window, joined my small hands together, and prayed to the stars.
神様、私がちゃんと習い事やお勉強ができるように、しっかり見守っていてください。
The next day was my regular music lesson. I sat perched quietly in front of the piano that had been shipped overseas from Hamburg, waiting for the teacher to arrive. In that moment, if somebody had snuck up and hit the keyboard, I might have tumbled right off the bench. My anxiety and fear must have shown on my face. When my tutor arrived, she closed the door carefully behind her and immediately came to my side.
あなたはね、本当にダメで落ちこぼれでバカなのよ。わかってる？
That's pretty mean. She spoke in a very gentle voice, so for a moment the sentence didn't really register. But all too soon I realized that she had spoken awful, terrifying words.
さあ、言ってごらんなさい。私は落ちこぼれのダメな人間です。
Oh. The shooter struck me with a thin, stiff rod. The stinging pain of the blow lingered like a nasty paper cut.
あなた日本語がわからないの？誰がそんな返事をなさいって言いました？
だって。
さあ言ってごらん。あなたのせいで私がお父様に無能だと言われているのよ。あなたが全部悪いんでしょ？あなたの責任なのよ。はい。私は落ちこぼれでバカのダメな人間です。
You know, I watched a really good movie called Mr. Holland's Opus, and it had to relate to a teacher and growing up with his students and things like that. And there was a point where one of the other teachers was trying to get him to teach an athlete because he was going to lose a scholarship because of his grades, and he was a music teacher, so he tried to teach him music, but he had a really hard time getting it. And Mr. Holland's like, I can't teach him. He doesn't get it. He's like, and then the other guy's like, well, you know what? You're just a bad teacher then. You know, it's not the student's fault. You just got to relate it. You know, they can learn the stuff. They can learn the material. It's just, you know, sometimes it's not always cut and dry on how to do it. Sometimes you got to think outside the box to get them to learn something. I didn't want to say it. Even a child could understand how cruel those words were. But I was so terrified of being struck again that I squeezed them out anyway.
私は落ちこぼれでバカなダメ人間です。
そうね、よくできたわね。褒めてあげましょうね。さあ、クズ、練習するわよ。
はい。
そうそう、先生が指導したところ、お父様に見せたらダメよ。もしそんなことしたら、殺しますからね。
I don't think she could have been serious, but my entire body shrunk in fear. I was so terrified that I couldn't answer, and since I didn't respond, she hit me again. From that day on, violence came to be known as discipline.
いい子ね。では、レッスンしましょう。
I had numerous tutors, but after that day, it wasn't long before every one of them began to discipline me in the same way. That female tutor might have told the others that I wouldn't tattle to my parents no matter what they did to me. Their discipline grew more refined with time, developing into a kind of art. They found ways to cause me pain without leaving telltale marks behind. Skillfully and thoroughly, they broke me in mind and body. It became impossible for me to look people in the eyes when I spoke. I was never good at holding lengthy conversations, but my responses grew shorter with every passing day. By the end, I was barely speaking at all. Even then, my suffering might have been slightly meaningful if those Spartan lessons had produced results. But no matter how many times I tried to please my tormentors, it never improved my evaluations. My fathers dismissed the tutors and 1 and 2s over my terrible results until none remained. They cursed me to my face before they went. Some even spat on the floor of my room before stalking out.
Michiru, 何か嫌なことはあったかい？
ああ、何もない。
そうか。まあ、勉強や習い事なんてできなくていいさ。健康に育ってくれれば、それだけでパパは満足だぞ。
You know, this is like a stark contrast to Sachi's route, where Sachi was kind of the brilliant student, whereas Michiru is, you know, she's having a lot of issues learning things. And it's interesting. But I was unable to fulfill even that modest hope. On my walks around the garden, I would sometimes find myself painfully short of breath, clutching my throbbing chest. Most likely anxiety attacks. Ugh, pretty nasty. My parents grew concerned. Eventually, they brought me to a big hospital for an examination. And there I was diagnosed with a serious heart disease, the doctor's verdict. Continuing to lead a normal life outside of the hospital would necessitate significant restrictions on my activities. From now on, I'd have to refrain from vigorous exercise.
穏やかに無理をせず過ごしなさい。そうでないと取り返しのつかないことになるよ。
I couldn't study or play the piano. I was never much of an athlete. Even talking with people was a struggle. And now, I've become an invalid who couldn't even live a normal life. You know, and as I watched my parents' faces filled with disappointment, a thought occurred to me. Oh, look at that. My tutors were right all along. They told me I was a stupid, useless person who didn't even deserve to live. And they weren't wrong. They must have said it 100 times. Why didn't I figure this out earlier? Of course they beat me. It's only natural to treat garbage like garbage. You know, thinking that way made me feel a little better. I was stupid to even try to answer my parents' expectations. I wasn't cut out for that from the start. The thought freed me from my burdens. It also wiped away the meaning of my existence. Soon my parents had lost all hope in me, and devoted their nights to producing a new child. Their previously frequent visits to my room grew rare, and the time I spent alone increased. My room was always cold. I kept the curtains shut throughout the day. Little by little, I felt myself slipping away from the world outside. Nothing I did ever turned out right, but of course it didn't. You know, I was affected from the start. Clumsy and awkward as I was, I soon found the one and only thing I was good at. Letting time roll past in empty, uneventful silence. I would sit quietly in my room, not budging a millimeter all day, simply drawing breath. That alone became something of a specialty of mine. Even a mollusk at the bottom of the sea probably couldn't beat me at staying still. That was all I had left to be proud of. I continued to live like a clam, but biologically speaking, I was a human being. My body grew larger little by little, and in time I stopped being a child. I was no longer allowed to shut myself up in my room doing nothing. I had to go to a place called school. The little mermaid who lived at the bottom of the sea couldn't speak the human tongue very well. By the same token, I couldn't really communicate with the other students. It didn't help that I was a clam, not a beautiful princess. Everyone around me could live a normal life. I envied them from the bottom of my heart. I couldn't study or make friends. Moving around a little would get my heart screaming with pain. Just keeping myself breathing was about all I could manage. At first, a number of my classmates made an effort to draw me out of my solitude, but I didn't know what to say to them. I mean, most of the time I just nodded my head and mumbled yeah with a stiff expression on my face. Inevitably, the people who approached me gradually gave up, and eventually the class came to operate as if I wasn't there. That was a kind of a relief in a way. Nobody expected anything from me, so I couldn't disappoint anyone. It was as though I was made of air. Even in school, I could return to my life as a clam. I thought that was just fine. Not bad at all. My parents made sure I went to school regularly, probably thinking I'd at least have to communicate with other people there. But it wasn't rare for me to go an entire day without speaking a single word. Even when the teacher took attendance, they just glanced in my direction, not bothering to call my name. As my free time increased, I began to think pretty regularly about the point of my own existence. Or rather, the pointlessness. Why was I going to school? I mean, why was I even alive? I considered those questions at some length. Watching from afar as my classmates laughed together and chatted enthusiastically about television sometimes, I would have to fight the urge to burst into tears. They were so close, but I was separated from them by an insurmountable wall. Even a trash can is useful to others. I was just taking up space. Why was I born in the first place? My parents had given me a cell phone, saying I'd probably need it as a student. There wasn't a single message or call recorded in the history log. Memory was clean, pure white. The phone must have been lighter than anyone else's. It was empty inside. Unless I kept a firm grip on it, it'd probably float up into the air, get pecked at by some passing bird, and disappear with a pop. I want to die. In the end, that was my only conclusion. A year passed in that school, then two, and that was my only constant rock of truth. On the deserted rooftop of the school building, looking up into the blue sky that stretched out over the road to school, I longed for death. I simply didn't understand the point of continuing to breathe. I mean, living every day as a non-entity is something like walking on an icy road in bare feet. At first, it's scary, but soon enough your nerves are paralyzed. You feel nothing at all. A good while later, when you realize this might be pretty bad, it's already far too late. There's nowhere to go from here. There's nothing to be done. You live every day of your life frozen to the ground, choking on bitter cold air. You might as well just die then. With that thought in mind, I began to head up to the roof during every recess period. Up here, the only thing separating this world from the next was a waist-high steel fence. Someday I'll cross over that fence and become free. Someday I'll escape into nothingness. Comforted by those thoughts, I waited patiently for the right timing. I waited for someone, God or whoever else, to send a sign just for me. I'd wrap my arms around my knees and sit, telling myself maybe today would be the day. You know, maybe today the clouds would part for a ray of light and a voice from above would say, "Come, it's time." I would stare closely at the trains barreling past the station, wondering if the sign might flash past in a window of a carriage. But instead, I just sat by myself on that roof. No matter how long and patiently I waited, I never saw any signals. Nobody whispered the words in my ear. In the end, I was all alone, just like I was everywhere else. Every place was the same to me. I was in the corner of the room where I'd been beaten terribly. I was deep at the bottom of the sea where no light could reach me. I was at the end of the world, surrounded on all sides by silent walls of stone. God must have been busy with something else. Otherwise, why wouldn't he fly over to me and speak the words? One day, when I went to the rooftop as usual, I found a girl who had just in that very moment crossed over the fence. She was standing boldly on the very edge of the building, staring straight ahead. And when I saw her, one powerful thought filled my mind. That's not fair. After all my anguished internal debating, all my suffering, all my waiting, I couldn't get myself over that fence. Why did this girl get to make it look so easy? That girl was going to kill herself. She was going to leap off the roof, fall into the concrete below, and end her life. It was obvious enough from the way she stood there, straddling the border between roof and sky, arms outstretched like wings to catch the wind. Seemed almost to be enjoying herself. It wasn't the sort of pose you could make if you cared about your own life. Anyway, it wasn't fair. Why did she get to die when I had to live? I didn't have the first idea who she was, but it just wasn't fair. I was trying to shout as loudly as I could, but what came out of my mouth was a weak, spiritless sound, like the rasping of a broken down old accordion. It probably didn't help that I wasn't used to conversation, but my voice just wasn't coming out right. The girl quietly stared down at the ground far below, not even noticing my presence behind her. She seemed to be looking for the exact moment to jump. Maybe God had already given her the signal. I called out again and again, but she didn't seem to hear. Maybe I no longer even existed in the world. Maybe I'd slipped into some alternate plane of existence long ago, and was just peeking into this world through an interdimensional one-way mirror. She ignored me so completely that it seemed possible. I called out to her, my voice choked with tears, but even then she didn't turn around. The girl's body went into spasms of shock. She looked like a wild animal with its fur standing on end. And then at long last, she timidly turned around to face me. My tear-stained face must have been a real sight. The girl lifted herself over the fence and returned to this side. She was wearing the same uniform as me, and surprisingly, she was clearly from my school. She handed me her handkerchief, and I dried my tears. Nothing like that had ever happened to me before. It was embarrassing, but it made me sort of happy. I didn't really want to know what to do next. Well, that was kind of a hard question, actually. I just didn't want her to die. And it's not like I was about to lecture her on treasuring her life or anything. I was just scared by the thought of someone escaping this world while I was still hesitating on the edge. The girl watched me as if observing some rare species of animal. I didn't have the first idea where to begin, or how to explain myself. So after thinking it over for quite some time, I chose the simplest option. Screwed up after all, huh? Guess I can't even manage a normal conversation anymore. The thought made me genuinely sad. I couldn't find my usual numb indifference. It felt like a harsh reminder that I didn't belong in this world any longer. Watching as I slumped my shoulders dejectedly, the girl burst into laughter. Although I didn't have any real evidence either way, I didn't feel like she was mocking me. It was relieved, happy laughter. Sort of laughter I haven't heard in a long time. I wasn't sure what to do, so I just stood there quietly as she laughed and laughed. But no matter how much patiently I waited, she just wouldn't stop. Much the opposite, after a while she threw herself down on the ground and began to roll around, her roars of amusement even louder than before. Watching her rolling around like that started to get me in kind of a silly mood myself. The moment I noticed a little giggle slipping out of my mouth, the dam seemed to break. I began laughing so loudly I surprised myself. The two of us laughed for a very, very long time. Long enough that the color of the sky changed above us. Long enough that I could almost believe the whole seasons had passed by. When her laughter finally came to an end, the girl rose shakily to her feet, both hands clutching her belly. She opened her mouth to speak, but at first she could only manage a few high-pitched little giggles. So that was it after all. The girl had been planning to die. I knew that much from the start, but when she came out and said it so bluntly, I was still slightly taken aback. I didn't deserve to be thanked by anyone. Why was she saying this to me?
なんで？
むしろなぜ泣く？よしよし、落ち着け落ち着け。どう。
なんで？
The girl wrapped a hand around my neck and drew me close. After briefly petting my head, she hugged me tightly against her.
あなたは本当に変な子だね。でもそういう子嫌いじゃないぞ。とか言ったりしてな。
Her chest had a sweet milky odor. I'd never smelled another girl's body like this before. I didn't know what to do. About anything, really. It was all too much. My mind just couldn't keep up.
そうだな。友達になろうか。うん、友達になろう。何しろ命の恩人だもんね。これはもう親友だな、むしろ。そうだよ、親友だよ。親友じゃん？
Everyone needs a friend.
親友？
よろしくね、親友。
よろしくお願いします。
I'd convinced myself there was no place for me in this world, but when I felt the life pulsing in her chest, I found myself able to breathe easily again. She smelled sweet, and her body was soft and warm. I couldn't remember the last time I'd been so close to another person. Contact with other people always seemed scary, and it was really scary, to be honest, but at the same time, how can I put this? More than anything else, it felt like someone was gently tickling my heart. I returned home that day feeling as if I'd been reborn. Probably because of my unusually cheerful expression, my parents struck up a conversation with me for the first time in a while. I wasn't able to explain very well, but I did tell them that I'd gotten to know somebody at school. I didn't say I made a friend, let alone a best friend. After all, there was still a chance that it had all been a delusion on my part. Maybe tomorrow everything would be right back to the way it was. And that would be way too sad, right? Better not get my hopes up. My parents said, "I see, good for you." mixed emotions on their faces. Sorry, I had a cough. Not that it bothered me much. That night I ate my dinner slightly earlier than usual, and slipped into bed slightly before my normal time. For once, I actually wanted tomorrow to arrive a little bit faster. That's good. But in school the next day, I found everything the same. It wasn't like I changed after all, I was still just me and myself. Nobody in my class even tried to talk to me. That morning I thought I might be able to keep a bit of smile on my face, but in the end my expression was gloomier than ever. Maybe that girl I met the day before was a sign from God, a little cosmic meddling to keep me from killing myself at the wrong time. Could have just said so from the start then. I nearly misunderstood. Nearly thought I'd found some place where I belonged. How silly. I nearly thought it was okay for me to live. I nearly started thinking like a normal person. That was a close one. I almost forgot what my tutors taught me so thoroughly. Yeah, that had to be it. I didn't have a best friend. That was all a dream. Dreams aren't worth it, are they? You end up feeling really tired when you wake up. After school, I stood from my seat before anyone else and beelined for the exit. For now, I just wanted to get out of that place. But the rooftop had become frightening, so I couldn't go back there. I wanted to run away, but I couldn't figure out where to go. All I knew was that I didn't want to be where I was. When I slid open the door and dashed out into the hallway, there was a harsh thump and everything went black for a moment. In my haste, I'd run headlong into somebody. I'm sorry. Somehow squeezing out the words, I turned to run, but before I could take another step, someone firmly seized me by the back of my uniform. I reflexively dropped my bag and shielded my head against the blow that would follow. This was a deeply ingrained habit from my childhood. When the tutors hit my head strongly, the nausea and dizziness would sometimes last for hours. If nothing else, I wanted to avoid that. But the violence I feared didn't arrive. On the contrary, my captor bent down and picked up the bag I'd thrown to the ground. Oh, it's her.
相変わらず変な人だね、松島みちる。
It was the first time in a while somebody had bothered to call me that. A silly thought flashed through my head. Oh, so that's what my name sounds like.
ねえ、お腹空いたからどむんない？おごるから。
まる？
In front of my eyes was the girl from my dream. I was definitely awake, but somehow I was dreaming.
断ったりしないよね。親友だもんね。この後何か用事でもあるの？
Couldn't get myself to speak properly, so I shook my head vigorously from left to right. No, nothing at all. And I kept right on doing it, until at last the girl reached out and caught my cheeks in her hand to hold me still.
わかったわかった。それじゃあ、行こう。お腹空いちゃった。
She led me by the hand, and for the first time in my life, I entered a so-called fast food restaurant. The complicated menu and colorful photographs left me lightheaded, and I didn't have the first idea how to order. After stewing in confusion and panic for a long while, I tugged on her
あな
sleeve.
た、本当にこういうところ初めてなの？
I quietly nodded my head. She just watched me for a moment and laughed in amusement. A little later, a small tray sat on our surprisingly cramped little table, bearing the hamburger and fries the girl ordered for me. I felt like she was really close. Eating a meal with my face so near to someone else's made me kind of nervous. I could feel my stomach churning. What was I going to do if I threw up?
あなた、隣のクラスだったんだね。こんなに面白い子がいるなんて全然知らなかった。ん？どうかした？
これ写真と全然違う。ぺたんこ。
ハンバーガー？本当に面白いね。
うん。面白い？
うん、面白い。そうだ、あなたクラスメートに何て呼ばれてるか知ってる？
私、何か言われてるの？
そう、言われてる。しかも悪口。幽霊って呼ばれてんの。笑っちゃうでしょ？なんでよって思ったから、そんなこと言うのよしなさいって言っといたわよ。
She chattered happily on, swinging a fry back and forth. I had no idea how to respond. I mean, I was surprised to know they bothered to badmouth me, but I was even more shocked she told them to stop. Why was this person being so nice to me?
しかもあなたお嬢らしいじゃん。だからってファーストフード初めてってちょっと浮世離れしすぎじゃない？
お嬢
そう、お嬢。ところでさ、携帯ある？赤外線やろうよ、赤外線。
赤外。
わかった。それは今度にしよう。ひとまず、今日は食べなさい食べなさい。ここは私のおごりだから。そのぺったんこたーんとお食べ。どうせ私にはこれぐらいしかおごれないんだし。
I picked up the miserably flat little hamburger from its bed of wrapping paper and took a large bite. To my surprise, a strong and vibrant flavor instantly filled my mouth. It might not have looked anything like the photo, but it actually tasted really good.
どうだ？おいしいじゃろ？
おいしい。
なんで泣いてんの？謎なんだけど。おいしくて泣いてんの？それは大げさでしょ。ゾウさんも大喜びだな、こりゃ。
The hamburger was warm, the girl in front of me was kind, and I couldn't stop crying. Not surprisingly, she looked a little astounded, but even as she laughed, no matter what I did, she'd laugh. After that, she started coming by every day after school, inviting me along to all sorts of different places. I guess she must have found my complete cluelessness kind of entertaining. One day it was karaoke, the next an arcade. The day after that was something else entirely. I got to see a lot of new places and experienced a lot of new things.
ねえねえ、ここに書いてある初プリって何？
She laughed when I asked that question too, more than anything else. She was a girl who laughed a lot. The places I went with her were always glittering with vivid rainbows of light. When I went back home after we said goodbye, my room looked stale and dismal by comparison. It was like falling into a broken down monochrome world. More and more, I spent my time impatiently counting down the hours until our next outing, wishing she'd swoop down and take me out of there. I remember getting off the train with her at some station I'd never visited before and buying matching pencil boxes in a store I never knew existed. After anguishing over my choices for dozens of minutes, I bought her a small hairpin as a present and got a pouch in return. We traded hair scrunchies, ate ice cream together. The days rolled by like one unbroken dream. Her email address and phone number were recorded in my cell phone. I was too scared to send her a message or dial her number, but for some reason, just looking at those characters on the screen would bring a smile to my face. One day, the two of us were on the rooftop after school, gazing leisurely out at the setting sun. The girl spoke to me in a quiet voice as the wind blew through her hair.
ミチルは聞いてこないよね。
何が？
どうして飛び降りようとしてたかってこと。
Ooh. She was always smiling, so I was taken aback, but to see her look so serious all of a sudden. And more importantly, that completely unexpected question left me thoroughly flustered.
だって死にたかったんでしょ？それが全てじゃない。
そりゃそうだね。飛び降りの理由なんてそれしかないもんね。ミチルは本当に変な子だ。
そうかな。そんなことないけど。
私はね、いろいろな人にいろいろなことを聞かれるんだ。進路がどう、彼氏がどう、バイトがどう、手の傷がどう、薬がどう、中に出すとか、もうよくわかんないよ。もっとシンプルな世界で生きていたいと思う。
I didn't really understand what she was saying, so I listened very carefully. I hoped that if I listened carefully enough, I'd be able to pick up at least a little.
結局さ、人間って一人だよね。 私のことを心から大事にしてくれる人なんてどこにもいないんだ。最後にはみんな消えていくよね。
I wanted to say it wasn't true, but I couldn't manage to speak.
嫌われたくないな。だったら先に私から嫌ってやりたい。私から先に消えてしまいたい。あ、ごめんね。行かなきゃ。
うん。いってらっしゃい。
みちる。
何？
好きだよ。
Aww. With those words, she playfully pretend kissed me on the cheek. My face went red as a lobster, and I made a strange little ah noise.
冗談。またね。
The evening sun was just sinking below the horizon as she left, still laughing, of course. I just stood there for a while as darkness settled over the rooftop. The cell phone was always ringing. I didn't like it. Every time she was called off somewhere, she'd be quiet and subdued for a long time afterward. Her smiles looked forced. I was worried somebody might be doing cruel things to her, but I wasn't able to ask. Sometimes she'd notice the concern in my eyes and laugh. It's okay, don't worry. But I knew it wasn't. It wasn't okay at all. It was a complete coincidence, but I'd seen a pregnancy test fall out of her bag when she dropped it. And I knew she'd been absent for a while after that. I was afraid of asking her something would pop the bubble, destroying what we had. And because of that fear, I stayed silent. Even then, I know I was being a coward. She had pulled me up from the bottom of the sea. Shouldn't I return the favor? Take her hand like she did for me? The question tormented me for a very long time. But there was no way I could do what she had done. I was still a piece of trash. It was only thanks to her that I could laugh a little. It was only thanks to her that I had found a little happiness. I could not allow myself to misunderstand. This was a temporary world, a dream I'd wake up from eventually. Lingering alone on the roof, I gripped the cold metal handrail tightly. I still didn't have the courage to make the short journey to the other side of that fence. In that respect, too, she was an amazing person. She had so much that I didn't. Even the courage to end her own life. For a few days after answering the call, she didn't attend school. I was consumed by the fear something bad might have happened to her, just like when I was a child. I knelt by the windowsill and whispered countless prayers.
神様、どうか守ってあげてください。今まで通り、彼女が笑っていられるようにしてください。
At school, I would hesitate in my classroom at the end of the day, thinking she might appear in the doorway like always to drag me off to play. But I was a ghost in that class. I didn't dare make myself conspicuous. I reluctantly trudged up to the roof and waited for her, but no matter how patiently I waited, she never came. There was nothing but the steady passage of time. I did nothing but draw breath in a monochrome world. One day, somebody called my cell phone from a withheld number. I was scared to pick it up, but thinking it just might be her, I gathered up the courage I could muster and pressed the answer button. On the other side of the line, I heard someone breathing harshly as if in pain. Maybe it was nothing more than a random prank call from a stranger. But in my mind's eye, I saw her on the other end, a person I cared about more than anyone else in the world. And I remembered her words on the roof that day. I mean, when you get right down to it, we're all alone, right? It's not like anybody really cares about me from the bottom of my heart. Everybody disappears in the end. Don't want to be hated, so I'll hate first. Before they can leave me, I want to disappear, or whatever. Back then, I wasn't able to give a proper response. I left so many things unsaid. I decided to convey those feelings to whoever this might be.
どうして一人だなんて思うの？ちゃんとあなたのこと友達だって思って 大切にしてる人がいるよ。それなのにどうして一人でどこかに行こうとするの？あなたは置いていかれるのがどんなに辛いか分かってないんだ。失うことは当たり前だよ。誰かに嫌われることだって特別なことじゃない。私、あなたのこと大好きだよ。だからどこにも行かないで。もしあなたが自分のことを不幸せだと思うなら、これから幸せになろう。ここに戻ってきて、これからまた一緒に生きよう。
The person on the other end of the line hung up without a single word. Felt as though I'd been abandoned, left behind. I squeezed my cell phone tightly in my hand. Even now, I don't know who called me that day.